Yo, I'm Bob. Into Star Wars, happen to be totally blind since birth, talking about The Bad Batch Season 3, Episode 5, The Return. So it premiered today, as this video is being filmed on March 6th in 2024. It's the 37th episode of the show overall. Spoilers ahead, of course. So if you haven't watched the episode, you're going to get spoiled. However, if you don't mind spoilers, then come right along anyway. That being said, jumping right in, and you were warned. I like how this episode began with a quiet morning, a quiet couple of moments for Omega. She has been held captive by the Empire for months. And this episode begins, I would imagine, during a very beautiful morning on Pabu. And this kid deserves it. You know, she wakes up in her own room aboard the Marauder. She's got her little doll with her Tuca doll there as she's waking up. And she is home. She's among family. And I wrote about that earlier this morning on Twitter. If you've got a family, a found family, what have you, if you love and are loved in return, and if that cycle rather continues, then that's what it truly feels like to come home. And I like that Omega is getting a lot of that in this episode. You know, she's back in her element as the episode begins, and I like how uh, the folks on Pabu basically sent her a fruit basket when she showed back up. Well, they're not in a basket, but I mean she keeps getting all this fruit from Liana and her dad as the episode begins. So Crosshair, however, he's doing his own thing. He's kind of isolating himself from the group. You know, he's training, as he says, with his sniper rifle. Omega says he's hiding, and you've got Az who's kind of having to hold the fruits and spin around with them for target practice. And he still manages to sound all blithesome as Omega shows up, but you can hear him whenever Crosshair is firing with his sniper rifle to splatter the fruits. He doesn't sound like he's too thrilled, but I mean, you know, he knows Crosshair's not going to do anything to damage him. But when the audio description track first described this scene to me, I remember thinking, oh, geez, Crosshair, what are you doing? Are you trying to blow this poor droid voiced by Ben Diskin up? I love Ben Diskin, and it just makes me want to see more episodes of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe on Netflix whenever I hear this guy voicing stuff these days. I really love him as Skeletor, but I also love him as AZ in this show too. And it's awesome to see him back, even though it was a very minor appearance. So Crosshair is still having issues with his trembling hand. And once again, I'm reminded of Dark Tower 5, Wolves of the Kala, in which Roland starts having to deal with a couple of issues with his hands. So I like that this hasn't been resolved yet. And I think it's all leading to Crosshair eventually getting to trust the Batch, where he's not quite there yet in this episode, although he does take several steps forward. I mean, he's used to being a soldier for the Empire. So now he's back among his brothers, but at the same time, he feels like he's done too many questionable things. You know, he feels like he's past the point of no return, I think. And when you've done a lot of things you regret, I think in terms of being Crosshair, you know, he's just not really sure where he fits. He doesn't feel like he belongs among the Batch when the episode begins. He's not really wanting to head back to the ship. He's kind of off by himself, an island unto himself, as it were. And I like how Omega's like, you know, you could talk to Az about your hand. He might be able to take a look at it for you. And Crosshair's insisting that he's fine. And I think my favorite parts of the episode are undoubtedly with Crosshair trying to figure out where he belongs, because Omega, she's back in her element. However, Crosshair doesn't feel like he's quite in his element as the episode continues. You know, he's not really sure if he wants to talk to Hunter about all the things that have happened. He feels like they don't trust him. And Omega may have come home, but I think for Crosshair, at least for half of the episode anyway, he feels very uncomfortable because there are issues that he and Hunter have to talk about. And that, of course, leads us to Crosshair having to go back to Barton 4. And he has to relive one of the darkest moments in his life, having to, you know, if you remember during the outpost, to carry Mayday back from the wilderness to the outpost on Barton 4. And that is where his brother died in his arms. He had to, well, he didn't have to, but he chose to unalive the Imperial officer who wouldn't get that clone medical help. So for Crosshair, he's having to face his demons in this episode, because they got to go back to, they have to go back to Barton 4 in order to see if they can't break the encryption on Nalase's datapad. They need to figure out where Tantus is. And of course, when they get to Barton 4, before we face a giant monster, we get that, I would call it a very beautiful scene, where Crosshair goes into the outpost and you see him lining up all of the helmets of the fallen clone troopers. And according to the audio description, well, they don't tell you it's Mayday's helmet when he picks it up, but he spends a lot of time with the first helmet that he picks up. So I am imagining that it's probably Mayday's helmet there, the very first one that he picks up. And I like this scene because in the outpost, Crosshair, of course, he didn't get to say his goodbyes, proper goodbyes. He was stunned, and then he was hauled off to Tantus and tortured. But here, we see him basically having something of a memorial service for all the clones that were viewed as expendable as the episode commences. So, of course, you have to have an action scene in this episode. And as Wrecker says, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says, why is there always a giant monster? I don't know how many creatures the Batch has faced by now. They've had to deal with a Rancor. Just this season, they've had to deal with the Slithervines. Wrecker and Hunter have had to deal with those, along with giant Resident Evil grody tentacle mouth there. So here they are having to deal with an ice worm on Barton 4. It just breaks up through the ice. They had to divert power from the sensors that was keeping the ice worm at bay. So I like that it's kind of a race against time. They need to get the information they need from the data pad. They don't get very much, but they do find out that there are more clone prisoners on Tantus than they realized. And of course I'm thinking, well, yeah, there are clone troopers, but I wonder who else they've cloned. And I don't know. I'm wondering if they're going to go that route with Asajj in the Bad Batch. Maybe this is not necessarily Asajj. Maybe this is a clone. Or maybe we're just going to see her in a flashback. I don't know. I wonder if it's going to be a bit similar to the way they handled things in The Force Unleashed 2. If you remember that video game, it is a clone of Galen Merrick from The Force Unleashed, but the clone has all of his memories, and it's basically the same character, but in a new skin. You know, he's got all the previous Galen's memories. So I kind of wonder if we might be going there. I don't know. We're probably just going to get a flashback for Ventress, though. Either way, I thought this episode was going to be about Ventress when I first saw the title, because you have the return. But I like that this is all about Crosshair's return to the fold when it comes to the Bad Batch. He has been following orders. He has been used and abused by the Empire for quite some time. And this is all about him finding his brothers once again. This is all about him, regaining their trust as it were, and he's having to go to some very dark places. I like how, after they deal with the ice worm, he finally tells Hunter, I've done things that I regret. Because he and Hunter had that altercation earlier in the episode. And, Hunter was attempting to get Crosshair to talk to him about what had happened, why he was on the Empire's bad list. And Crosshair just couldn't voice what had happened to him. He still hasn't told them about carrying Mayday from the wilds of Barton 4 all the way back to the outposts, and Mayday ultimately dying when they return. There are some things, I think, that are just beyond words. And I like that, when Crosshair is moving those helmets in line, you've got Hunter standing there, I would imagine unseen by Crosshair, but he's watching him. And he kind of nods to himself like, oh, I see. He's finally figured out that the Empire views clones as property. They view clones as cannon fodder. They view clones as nothing but expendable tools. And, I like how they kind of mend fences before the episode is over. I forgot about Echo. I've been wanting to see this character again, but we've been so focused on Omega for the past 4 episodes that it was great to see Echo in this episode. No Rex, but I like seeing Echo make his return to the Bad Batch, since he played a very big part in this series as it began, before he decided to leave with Rex and try to make life better for clones elsewhere in the galaxy. And I like that, even though this episode feels rather like a one-off, well, it may feel that way to some, but it really doesn't to me. You still have them taking steps to head back to Tantus. They need to figure out the location so they can free the clones that are still held on Tantus. And I'm glad that we're not done with this location, because I really like the Emperor's cloning facility, and I would imagine he has that storehouse as well on Tantus. I would say my favorite part of the episode is undoubtedly the aftermath of the ice worm attack, because you've got that moment where you have Crosshair and Hunter who decide to reconcile. I like how Crosshair, earlier on in the episode, he looks at Hunter and he tells him, I think you're angry at me because I was the one who helped Omega escape Tantus, and you couldn't do it. You're the one who failed. They're just kind of throwing accusations at each other like siblings tend to do sometimes. But the end of the episode, where they've been in a life-threatening situation together, and I think this has to happen for Crosshair, so you can have Hunter regaining that trust with him. I thought that was a pretty interesting moment there that the writers decided to throw in there with the ice worm attack. But then, after all the snow has settled, I was going to say dust, but I'm going to use snow because we're on Barton 4. I love how Crosshair admits that he was used by the Empire. He doesn't come right out and apologize, because that's Crosshair, and I think I don't know, I think he probably wouldn't do that. But I like him basically saying, hey, I realized I was duped by the Empire. I thought I was being a good soldier. I thought I was following orders. And I like how Hunter does show empathy. He's like, hey, none of us knew what was happening back then. And, you've got them getting the data pad, all of the information they need. Well, not enough. They've got some. It's it's not going to be nearly enough. I want to say we're probably not going back to Tantus until the very end of the season. At least I don't think we are. The next two episodes are Infiltration and Extraction. So I don't know what those are going to be about. I would imagine they're going to be going somewhere else. But if we go to Tantus right away, wow, I'm going to be really surprised. I also noticed the Ice Vulture back in the episode. And they kind of creep me out. Whenever you see them in this show, I mean, I always think about the clones coming to unfortunate ends. Crosshair, when he's on Barton 4, there always seems to be an Ice Vulture circling overhead. And for me, it's making me think, writers, are you trying to tell me that death has marked this clone? So that was my first thought. So I did write about that on Twitter, how I was kind of wondering if this was some kind of foreboding, foreshadowing moment for Crosshair, because this wasn't the first time we've seen the Ice Vultures circling as he's been on Barton 4. And I like Soprano Shayla's response. She says, I remember Mayday saying that those creatures, vicious as they are, always find a way to survive. So I've always interpreted them as a symbol of constant resilience and the almost desperate need to keep fighting and survive. Let's see. That Crosshair seems to have, which is much more of an optimistic take on their symbolism. And I actually like that. I think my mind tends to always gravitate toward clones biting the big one in Star Wars because they just keep doing that, But I hope that these guys are a symbol of resilience and survival, because I feel like we haven't seen enough of one of my favorite snipers in Star Wars. This guy was kind of absent in season 2. We got a few episodes with him in there, but we really didn't get as much Crosshair story while he was in the service of the Empire as I would have liked. We only got to see him hanging out with Cody on that one mission there in season 2, I believe. And then the very next time we see him, he is on Barton 4, and he basically has a watershed moment. He realizes just exactly how much the clones mean to the Empire. I really wish I could have seen maybe one or two more missions with him in season 2, just doing Empire stuff. But it's good to see him in season 3, back with the Bad Batch. Because I feel like, in season 2, he got some screen time, but it's awesome to see him doing a bit more this season. So I like this episode. I'd give it about 9.5 out of 10, and can't wait for next week because we're getting 2 episodes. We are getting Infiltration and Extraction, I do believe, on March 13th. So I'll be doing 2 separate videos for those episodes as well. I'll probably be published next Thursday and Friday, possibly next Wednesday and Thursday. Depends on how fast I can record these things. Oh, speaking of Crosshair, I love how Wrecker never threw his armor away. He seems to be ever the optimist, I think. And him saving Crosshair's armor like that, it doesn't surprise me at all. And I think it was a really heartwarming scene when he's like, hey, yeah, I saved this for you. I didn't want to throw it away. So it was such a cool scene when, he gives Crosshair his old armor. You may have disagreements with family, but hopefully there are situations and times when those can be put aside, and you have moments like this in real life. But I like seeing them in animation too. He is back in the fold. He has returned, and this was all about Crosshair kind of facing what happened on Barton 4 yet again, and being welcomed back into the Bad Batch. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty good episode, and I can't wait for next week for the the double dose next Wednesday. And then the following Wednesday, we're getting Bad Batch and X-Men 97. So I got a lot of stuff to record before March is over with. Oh boy. Till then, guys, may the Force be with you.